My father hit me with a Bible at the altar on my wedding day. It was a heavy book, leather-bound, embossed with gold leaf, the one he carried through every televised sermon for 20 years. He didn't open it. He didn't read from it. He simply grabbed the communion chalice from the deacon's tray, poured the consecrated wine over my face, and swung the Bible with both hands. The spine caught me across the left cheek and jaw. I heard my own bone crack before I felt the pain. Then I was falling backward, my veil tangling in the candelabra, my head hitting the marble steps with a sound like a dropped pumpkin. The church was full, 500 guests, my father's congregation, state senators, a congressman, the cameras of his television ministry broadcasting live to 50,000 homes across the Midwest, and my sister Ruth, pregnant with her new husband's child, sitting in the front row, her hands clasped over her belly, tears streaming down her face, tears of relief. My father stood over me, the Bible still in his hand, his wedding ring, a thick gold band engraved with a cross, glinting under the stage lights. He looked into the camera and spoke in the voice that had made him famous. The voice of God, or so his followers believed. "This woman is an adulteress," he roared. "She stole her own sister's husband. She has defiled this altar, and I, as her father and her shepherd, will not let her profane the house of the Lord." I lay on the steps, blood filling my mouth, my nose broken, my vision blurred. I could see Ethan's shoes. My groom, he was supposed to be kneeling beside me. He was supposed to be holding my hand. Instead, he was standing still, his hands at his sides, his face pale and empty. He didn't move. Not when the ushers dragged me out by my arms. Not when my father declared the wedding annulled. Not when Ruth stood up and led the congregation in a prayer for my deliverance from sin. I was 25. I woke up in a hospital with a reconstructed nose, a titanium plate in my cheek, and a scar on my jaw that would never fade. A scar shaped like a cross. My father's ring had cut it into my skin when the Bible struck me. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're here, maybe you know what it means to be punished in public for a crime you didn't commit. Maybe you know the particular horror of watching the person who raised you use God as a weapon. Maybe you know what it's like to have your face broken by a Bible while the cameras roll and the congregation says amen. If that's you, subscribe. Not because I have salvation, because I have a witness. And because the story I'm about to tell you ends with me standing on that same altar, under the same lights, with my scar exposed to 50,000 people. While my father screamed that the devil was attacking him, here's my story. I was born Naomi Vance, second daughter of Reverend Samuel Vance and his wife Esther. My father was not always a monster, or maybe he was and I was too small to see it. He started as a small-town preacher in Indiana, preaching in a converted barn with a dirt floor. By the time I was 10, he had a church. By the time I was 15, he had a television show. By the time I was 20, had a ministry, a mailing list, and a brand. Samuel Vance stood for family, for purity, for the traditional values that made his congregation feel safe in a changing world. He preached against divorce, against immodesty, against the corruption of modern women. His sermons were streamed, podcasted, printed in booklets with my face on the cover, the dutiful daughter, the artist who used her gifts for the Lord. I was the artist. Ruth was the voice. She was 3 years older, blonde where I was dark, polished where I was messy. She sang in the choir from the age of 6, and by 16 she was the soloist. Her voice was clear and sweet, the kind of voice that made people weep and open their wallets. She was the star of the ministry, the face on the brochures, the daughter my father pointed to when he talked about raising up godly women. I was the disappointment. I didn't sing. I drew. I painted murals on the walls of the youth room without permission. I read books my father banned. I asked questions in Sunday school that made the teachers stutter. When I was 17, I told my father I didn't want to be a missionary. I wanted to go to art school. He didn't hit me then. He didn't need to. He simply looked at me with the cold disappointment that was worse than any slap. "Art is vanity," he said, "and vanity is a sin. If you choose that path, Naomi, you choose to walk alone." I walked alone. I got a scholarship to a state school. I studied art therapy. I learned that color could heal, that lines could speak, that the body remembers trauma in ways the mind tries to forget. I worked with battered women, with children who'd seen too much, with veterans who couldn't name their wounds. I thought I'd left my father's world behind. I was wrong. The world is smaller than it looks. And sin, in my father's vocabulary, is anything that threatens his image. I met Ethan 2 years after his divorce from Ruth. He was a state representative then, young, ambitious, handsome in the way that politicians are handsome, clean, sharp, slightly empty. He came to my art therapy workshop through a colleague's referral. He was depressed, he said. He couldn't sleep. He kept seeing his ex-wife's face in crowds. I didn't know he was Ruth's ex-husband, not at first. He used his middle name, David. He didn't mention his past. We worked together for 6 months, charcoal, clay, watercolor, before he told me, one rainy Tuesday, that his marriage had ended because his wife had been unfaithful, repeatedly. With men she met through the ministry. I kept my face neutral. That must have been hard. It was public, he said. She made it public. She cried on stage, told the congregation I'd been neglectful, that I'd driven her to seek comfort. My career almost ended. My faith did. I didn't tell him who I was. Not then. I was afraid. Afraid that he'd run. Afraid that my father's shadow would swallow something good before it could grow. But I also knew, with the certainty of someone who'd grown up in that house, that Ruth had been the adulterer, that she'd always been the adulterer, that my father had spun the divorce into a story of Ethan's failure because Ruth was the golden child, and golden children don't sin. They only struggle. Ethan and I fell in love slowly. Carefully. He was gentle in a way that made me flinch at first. I was used to men who took, who demanded, who used God's name to justify their appetites. Ethan asked. He waited. He brought me coffee and remembered how I took it and never made me feel small for wanting things. When I finally told him who my father was, we were sitting on my apartment floor, surrounded by sketches. He went still. Then he said, I don't care. I know who you are, Naomi. I've known since the first day you're not him. I believed him. I shouldn't have. We announced our engagement quietly, no press release, no church bulletin. I wanted a civil ceremony, a small gathering, something that belonged to us. But my father found out. He always found out. He called me into his office, the one with the leather chairs and the framed photos of him with governors, and smiled at me with teeth that looked like tombstones. A wedding in the church, he said. Televised, a testimony to redemption. Your sister has forgiven Ethan, she has remarried, she is happy. And now you, my wayward daughter, return to the fold. It is a story, Naomi, a story that will touch millions. I don't want to touch millions, I said. I want to marry Ethan. You will marry him in my church, or you will not marry at all. He leaned forward. I have connections, Naomi. Ethan is climbing. He needs the evangelical vote. He needs my endorsement. And I will give it to him at the wedding, or I will destroy him. I will tell the world that he left my daughter for her sister, that he is a man of no honor, that his depression is a cover for depravity. He didn't leave Ruth for me. He left her because she cheated. And who will believe that? My father smiled. Ruth wept on stage. She was forgiven. She is the victim. You are the thief. That is the story. The only question is whether you want a happy ending or a tragic one. I agreed. Not because I was weak, because I was afraid. Because I loved Ethan and I believed that if we could just get through the wedding, we could disappear. Start over. Build something clean. I was an idiot, but I was a useful idiot. Because 3 weeks before the wedding, I found the files. I was at the church to deliver the wedding programs, my own illustrations, doves and olive branches, the kind of imagery my father approved of. I went to his office to drop them off. He wasn't there. His computer was on, the screen unlocked, the printer still warm. I shouldn't have looked, I know that. But I saw my name on a document and I stopped. It was a financial report, or rather, a series of transfers. The mission fund, the account my father's congregation donated to for spreading the gospel to the nations, had been used to pay for things that had nothing to do with missions. A clinic in the city, a consultation fee to a doctor whose name I recognized, a transfer to a woman in Ohio who'd been counseled by my father. I took photos with my phone. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough. The fund was a slush fund. It had been used to pay for Ruth's abortions, 2 of them, during her marriage to Ethan before she found God again. It had been used to silence women who'd accused my father of inappropriate conduct. It had been used to buy the silence of a girl named Lydia, who'd been in the youth choir when I was in college. I confronted him, not publicly, privately, in his office the day before the wedding rehearsal. I laid the printouts on his desk and said, I know what you've done. I know about Ruth, I know about the fund. And I know about Lydia. If you make me go through with this wedding, I'll expose you. He looked at the papers, then he looked at me, and he laughed. Naomi, he said, you have no idea what you are holding. These are not crimes, these are blessings. The Lord provides for his servants. Ruth's indiscretions were healed through prayer and discretion. The women who received funds were in need of pastoral care. And Lydia, he paused. His eyes went cold. Lydia was a troubled girl. She imagined things. She was grateful for the help she received. She was 17, she was grateful. He stood up, he walked around the desk. He put his hand on my shoulder and his grip was heavy. You will marry Ethan tomorrow. You will smile, you will weep at the appropriate moments, and you will never speak of this again. Because if you do, Naomi, I will not need to destroy you. Your sister will. And Ruth is far less merciful than I am. I should have run. I should have taken Ethan and driven until the cell towers couldn't find us. But I was 25 and I was afraid, and I still believed that family was something you could appeal to, that if I just explained, if I just showed them the truth, they would stop. I didn't know that the truth was exactly what they were trying to bury. The wedding was a production. White roses flown from Ecuador. A choir of 50, Ruth, radiant in lavender, singing Ave Maria as the processional. My mother Esther, weeping in the front row, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. And my father in his robes, his face composed in the expression of paternal benevolence he wore for the cameras. I walked down the aisle in a dress I'd designed myself, simple, ivory, with sleeves that covered my arms because my father said modesty is love. Ethan waited at the altar. He looked handsome. He looked nervous. He didn't look at me the way he had in my apartment, on the floor with the sketches. He looked at me like I was a role he was playing. We reached the altar. My father took my hand and placed it in Ethan's. He turned to the congregation. He began to speak about redemption, about the prodigal daughter, about the healing power of a family that forgives. Then he stopped. He looked at me, and his face changed. This union, he said, his voice dropping into the register he used for damnation, is built on sand. The congregation murmured. Ethan squeezed my hand. I didn't understand. Naomi, my father said, did you think I would let you profane this altar? Did you think I would let you steal your sister's husband and present it as love? He grabbed the communion chalice from the deacon. The wine, dark, sweet, consecrated, splashed across my face, into my eyes, blinding me with sticky red. Before I could scream, the Bible was in his hands, and then it was against my face, and then I was falling. I hit the steps. The pain was white and total. I felt my nose break. I felt my cheekbone give way. I felt the ring on his hand catch my jaw and tear the skin. I lay there, choking on blood and wine, while my father's voice filled the church. She is an adulteress. She conspired with this man to destroy her sister. The Lord commanded me to expose her before she could destroy this ministry. I tried to speak. I tried to say no, but my mouth was full of blood and teeth. I looked for Ethan. He was standing still, his hands at his sides, his face blank. He didn't move, not when the ushers came, not when they dragged me out by my arms, my dress tearing on the steps, my veil trailing behind me like a shroud. Ruth stood up. She walked to the aisle. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw it in her eyes. Not surprise, not grief, satisfaction. Then she turned to the congregation and began to sing, Amazing Grace. The choir joined. The congregation stood. And as they dragged me through the double doors, my father's church was singing, and my sister was smiling, and my groom was standing at the altar with his hands at his sides, doing nothing. I passed out on the sidewalk. The last thing I saw was the sky, gray and indifferent, and the cross on top of the church steeple, pointing at nothing. I woke up in the hospital with my face in a cage of metal and wire. My mother was there, but she wouldn't look at me. She sat in the corner, reading a prayer book, her lips moving silently. The police came. They asked questions. My father had already filed a temporary restraining order against me, claiming I was mentally unstable and had threatened the safety of the congregation. He had witnesses. Ruth, the deacons, my own mother, who signed a statement saying I'd been irrational and obsessed with Ethan for years. Ethan didn't come. He sent a letter, delivered by his attorney, annulling the engagement. For the good of my career, it said, and my faith. I was released from the hospital with a reconstructed face and a scar on my jaw that makeup couldn't hide. I moved to a studio apartment on the other side of the city. I changed my name professionally. I illustrated children's books under a pseudonym, gentle stories about animals and kindness, the opposite of everything I'd survived. I wore theatrical makeup when I left the house, layers of foundation and concealer that turned my face into a mask. I didn't date. I didn't go to church. I didn't speak to my family. For 4 years, I was a ghost. I was the woman who'd been hit with a Bible, the adulteress. The cautionary tale. My father's ministry used me in sermons about the dangers of hidden sin. He talked about how he'd saved his daughter from destruction, how he'd protected the sanctity of marriage. His congregation grew. His television audience doubled. He wrote a book about it, When Children Stray, A Father's Guide to Tough Love. I read it once. I threw it in the toilet and flushed. Lydia found me on a Tuesday in October. I was working in my studio, a converted closet with a skylight, when the buzzer rang. I didn't answer. I never answered. But she kept buzzing. And then she started calling my phone, a number I didn't recognize, leaving voicemails that said, "Naomi, I know what he did to you. I know what he did to me. Please, I need to talk to you before I do something I can't undo." I opened the door. She was smaller than I remembered. Fragile. Her hair was gray at the temples, though she was only 27. She had a scar on her wrist, fresh, still pink, and bandages that peeked out from under her sleeve. "I tried to kill myself last week," she said. "I swallowed pills. My roommate found me. And in the hospital, I realized I didn't want to die. I wanted him to be seen." She handed me an envelope. "I wrote everything down, for you, in case I don't make it." We sat on my floor. She told me her story. She'd been 17, a soloist in the youth choir, praised by my father for her anointing. He'd called her into his office for private vocal coaching. The first time, he touched her knee. The second time, her shoulder. The third time, he locked the door. "It went on for 3 years," she said. "He told me it was God's will, that I was special, that he was preparing me for ministry. When I turned 20, I told him I wanted to stop. He said he'd tell the congregation I was a liar, that I'd seduced him, that I was mentally ill. Did you tell anyone?" I told Ruth. Lydia's voice broke. "I found her crying in the bathroom once after a service. I thought she would help me. I thought she was good." She laughed, a bitter sound. She looked at me and said, "Shut up. If you speak, Dad falls. And if Dad falls, I fall." She gave me $5,000 from the mission fund. She said it was for counseling. It was for silence. I held Lydia's hand. I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years. Not grief, not fear, purpose. "There's more," Lydia said. "The fund, I kept records. I photocopied things when I worked in the office. Ruth's abortions, 2 of them during her marriage to Ethan. Paid for with missionary support for a clinic in the city, and there are others. Women, some who left the church, some who stayed and smile on Sundays. He used the same line on all of them. God's will. Special anointing. Don't tell." I looked at the envelope. Inside were pages of testimony. Names, dates, bank transfers, and a photograph. Ruth leaving a clinic, her face hidden by a scarf, her hand on her stomach. The date stamp was from 2 years into her marriage to Ethan. I sat with Lydia until dawn. I made her tea. I bandaged her wrist and called a therapist I trusted. And when she left, I stood in my studio and looked at my face in the mirror. I wiped off the makeup. I looked at the scar, the cross-shaped mark on my jaw, the one my father's ring had carved into me. I decided I would not hide it anymore. I would use it. I would become the wound that spoke. I didn't go to the police. My father had the police chief in his congregation, the prosecutor, half the city council. A direct accusation would disappear into the same slush fund that had paid for Ruth's silence. I went to him instead. I called my mother first, weeping, repentant, the broken daughter crawling home. "I was wrong," I said. "I see that now. I want to come back. I want to make peace." My mother wept. She arranged a meeting. My father received me in his office, the same office where he'd threatened me, the same office where Lydia had been hurt. He looked at my face, the scar visible, the makeup gone, and he smiled. "You've come to your senses," he said. "Praise God." "I want to serve," I said. "I want to use my art for the ministry. I've been illustrating children's books. I could illustrate yours, your next book, Healing Broken Families. I could design the cover, the interior, the promotional materials." He loved it, not because he needed an illustrator, because he needed to see me humbled. He needed to own me again. He agreed immediately. I spent 6 months in his office. I illustrated his book, doves, families holding hands, sunsets that looked like forgiveness. While I worked, I listened. I learned his schedule. I copied his keys when he left them on the desk. I installed a small recording device in the drawer where he kept his special counseling appointments. I documented every transfer from the mission fund. I contacted the women Lydia had named, one by one, and offered them not legal justice but narrative justice. The chance to be heard, to be believed, to be seen. Some said no, they were too afraid. Some said yes. They sent me emails, voice memos, copies of checks. I built a file. I built a fortress of truth, and I became the daughter he wanted. I attended Sunday services. I sat in the front row. I smiled when he introduced me as my Naomi, restored by grace. I hugged Ruth after services, and she hugged me back, her belly swollen with her new husband's child, her eyes wary but triumphant. She thought she'd won. She thought I was broken. She didn't know I was a camera, a witness, a blade being sharpened. The night of healing testimonies was my father's crown jewel. A live event, televised, streaming to 50,000 homes. The theme, Truth Sets Free. Ruth was the headliner. She would sing, she would testify, she would talk about her journey through betrayal and how God had restored her marriage and her voice. The auditorium was packed. Politicians, donors, television executives, the mothers from Ruth's mommy groups who didn't know she was a thief, the deacons who didn't know their pastor was a predator, the congregation hungry for a story that would make them feel righteous. I was backstage running the AV system. It was my job. The illustrations I'd designed for the event, soft watercolor backgrounds, crosses made of light, were cued on the screens. I wore a black dress. No makeup, my scar exposed. My father's assistant, a young man who admired me, had given me the master controls because your family. Ruth sang first. Her voice was as clear as ever. Soaring through his eye is on the sparrow, her hand on her pregnant belly, her face tilted toward the lights. The congregation wept. My father wept. It was a masterclass in performance. Then he took the pulpit. He opened his Bible, the same one I was sure, though he'd probably had it rebound to hide the bloodstains. He began to preach about truth, about the courage to expose sin, about the fathers who must protect their flocks, even from their own children. I waited. I watched him reach the crescendo, his voice rising, his hands raised, the congregation leaning forward. I pressed the button. The screens went black. The lights cut. For a moment, there was only darkness and the sound of my father's voice, confused, asking, "Is there a problem with the system?" Then the screens lit up, not with my watercolors, with Lydia's face. She was sitting in a chair, in a room I recognized, my studio. The skylight behind her. She looked at the camera and she spoke. "My name is Lydia Marsh. I was 17 when Reverend Samuel Vance called me into his office for private vocal lessons. He told me it was God's will. He told me I was special. He touched me. He hurt me. And when I tried to tell, he paid me to be quiet." The congregation gasped. My father's face went white. The screen cut to another woman, then another, then another. 5 faces, 5 testimonies. Each one naming him. Each one describing the same office, the same words, the same hand on their knee, their shoulder, their throat. Then the financial records. The mission fund transfers, the clinic payments, the names of doctors, the dates of Ruth's abortions, displayed next to the missionary support letters my father had sent to the congregation. Then the photograph. Ruth, leaving the clinic, her hand on her stomach, the date stamp clear as daylight. The congregation was silent. Then the whispers started, then the shouting. I walked onto the stage. I didn't run. I didn't sneak. I walked in my black dress with my scar exposed under the lights that had blinded me 4 years ago. I took the microphone from the pulpit where my father stood, frozen, his mouth open, his Bible limp in his hand. "My father told you I was an adulteress," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. It was the voice of a woman who had already been destroyed and therefore had nothing left to fear. "He told you I stole my sister's husband. He told you God commanded him to break my face with a Bible, but the truth is simpler. I found out he was stealing from you. I found out he was hurting children, and I threatened to tell, so he silenced me. Publicly. Permanently. He used my sister's lies to cover his own crimes, and he used God's name to do it." I looked at Ruth. She was standing in the front row, her face a mask of rage and terror. "Ruth knew," I said. "She knew about Lydia, she knew about the fund, she knew about the abortions she paid for with your tithes, and she let me be destroyed so she could keep singing." I turned back to the congregation. "I am not an adulteress. I am not a liar. I am a woman who was hit with a Bible for telling the truth. And this," I touched my scar, the cross-shaped mark on my jaw. "This is not a mark of shame. It is a mark of witness. He carved it into me, and now I am using it to carve the truth into him." My father tried to speak. He raised his Bible, his hand shaking. This is the devil. "The devil is not on this stage," I said. "The devil is in your office. He has always been in your office, and today he is finally seen." The police came. Not because I called them, I knew better than that. They came because 3 of the deacons in the audience were fathers of the girls who testified. They came because the congressman in the front row had a daughter. They came because truth, when it is spoken loud enough, is louder than power. My father was arrested on stage. Fraud, abuse, theft. He screamed as they led him away, not with the voice of God, but with the voice of a man who has been caught. "The devil is a liar," he shrieked. "The devil is using my daughter." Ruth collapsed, not from shame, from rage, because as they led her away for questioning, I didn't look at her with hatred. I looked at her with indifference, and for a woman who had built her life on being the center of attention, on being the chosen one, indifference was a deeper wound than any prison. Ethan was in the audience. I saw him as I walked off the stage. He was standing, his face pale, his hands shaking. He tried to speak. I walked past him. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his explanation. I had already stopped needing him the moment he let them drag me out of the church. The trial took a year. My father was convicted of financial fraud, sexual abuse of minors, and witness tampering. He died in prison awaiting appeal, a heart attack, officially, though the guards said he spent his last months screaming that the devil was in the walls. Ruth lost everything. Her husband left her, taking their child. Her voice developed a nodule from stress, and she never sang professionally again. She works now in a call center, according to the last thing I heard, answering phones with a voice that cracks. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to see them fall. I was already building. I opened Sacred Scars Studio in a converted warehouse downtown. It's a space for women with scars, physical, emotional, spiritual, to reclaim their bodies through art. We paint on our scars. We use pigments that are safe, that glow, that turn damage into design. Lydia is my first student. She paints murals on the walls, gardens growing out of broken concrete, birds with wings made of stitches. My scar is still there. The cross shape on my jaw, I don't cover it, I paint over it. A vine sometimes, a bird sometimes, a word sometimes. Today it says witness. Rose, my niece, Ruth's daughter, visits sometimes. She is 6. She doesn't know the whole story. She knows her mother is sick and her grandfather is away. She knows I am her aunt and that I have a mark on my face that tells a story. She asked me once, does it hurt? Not anymore, I said. Can I touch it? I knelt down. She put her small finger on my jaw, tracing the lines. It feels like a road, she said. It is, I said. It's the road I walked to get here. I'm Naomi. I'm 29 years old. I'm an artist, a survivor, a woman who was hit with a Bible and learned to paint with the blood. I am the daughter who came back not for forgiveness, but for truth. If someone used God's name to hurt you, or if they used any name that was supposed to mean love, drop a candle below. I read every single comment. And if this story made you want to reclaim the marks they left on you, hit subscribe. We tell stories like this every week. What truth are you finally ready to paint?